A girl sees dead people. She sees ghostly men that look like they're from the Matrix. And there's even a mean girl in this story. Is she traveling between time periods? This is Jace with Popcorn Recap, and today we'll be talking about a horror film called Last Night in Soho, or Black Swan meets Project Runway. Ellie has a deep fascination for the 1960s and does not shy away to show her love for old vinyl records, the fashion, and the overall grandeur of the 1960s. If she was black, she'd have a different feeling about the 60s, but I digress. Ellie opens the movie with a dramatic dance. Twirling around her room, Ellie accidentally knocks off a picture frame of her grandmother and late mother. She looks at it fondly before standing up and looking at the mirror where an apparition of her mother appears. She has a special gift of being able to see dead people. Yes, just like the boy in The Sixth Sense. Ellie asks her mother if good news is coming her way, just in time for her grandmother to come calling for her from downstairs. Ellie gets admitted to the London College of Fashion. While Ellie excitedly packs her vinyl player and records, her grandmother fusses about the dangers lurking around London. The next day, her grandmother reminds her to reach out whenever Ellie feels overwhelmed. She hands Ellie the framed picture of her and her daughter before bidding Ellie goodbye. After a long train ride, Ellie finally makes it to London. London is as excitable as ever, not letting Ellie catch a breath. Ellie arrives at the residence hall and meets Jocasta, her roommate, and the rest of Jocasta's freshly recruited posse. Jocasta is the stereotypical Regina George mean girl. Aside from the rather awkward fact of Ellie sharing how her mother killed herself when she was just 7, the night goes on as typically as it does with university students, partying, making out, and waking up hungover and late for the first day of class. Her grandmother eventually calls to check up on her. Ellie catches sight of a fallen advert for a room for rent from a nearby bulletin board. She immediately meets with Miss Collins, the landlady. The room is structured as if it were a time capsule straight from the 1960s. Miss Collins warns Ellie that it starts to smell weird when it gets warmer, but it's just the cooking from the French bistro nearby. Ellie immediately falls in love and moves out of the residence hall and away from her roommate's resting bitch face. Miss Collins and Ellie share a little chat over tea. Later, Ellie puts on a record to play. The bright lights from the next door bistro's flashing sign flood into her room. Then Ellie finally falls asleep, and she dreams of walking down a narrow alleyway leading to a street straight from the 60s. The people see Ellie as Sandy, a young blonde woman aspiring to become a singer. The movie constantly switches perspectives between Sandy's and Ellie's, but most of the time one or the other is stuck within a mirror, watching as events unfurl. Sandy sets her eyes on Jack, who also takes a liking to her. Jack is known for managing female singers and performers. Jack decides to suck on her neck. Sandy also lives, or lived, in Goode Street in the very same building Ellie is renting. Ellie wakes up from the dream. Inspired by the vibe of the 60s and Sandy's dress from last night, Ellie brings Sandy's pink flowing dress to life in class. The god-awful Jocasta comes over and comments on Ellie's hickey. Ellie's dreams, or more likely visions from the past, excite her to go home and turn down invites from John to hang out. John seems to have a strong liking to Ellie. Later, she plays another record to lull her to sleep. Jack comes knocking on her door, and Ellie steps out as Sandy. Jack had promised Sandy a gig. Sandy auditions to a crowd consisting of Jack, the owner of the place, and Ellie. Sandy gets the thumbs up to perform, and Jack offers to become her manager. Things seem to be going just fine. Ellie decides to have a hair makeover, switching out her naturally brown hair for a platinum blonde with bangs to match. And just like most fashion students, Ellie buys a branded luxury item of clothing worth £375. Desperate to make ends meet due to her recent purchase and her rent, Ellie visits the Toucan, the bar they had first crawled into the previous night before classes officially started. Ellie applies for a job and becomes a bartender for the basement pub. As she makes her way out of the pub, the old man Ellie frequently sees around stops her. He inquires about suspicious things like Ellie's well-being and her mother's whereabouts. Ellie, disturbed, cuts the conversation immediately and hurries off. Someone say creepy old man. That night, Ellie's vision doesn't seem as lively as the previous visions. Ellie expects Sandy to perform as the main act. However, Sandy only shows up as a backup dancer, dressed in provocative clothing and dancing to highly suggestive choreography. Disappointed, Ellie walks out of the main hall, seeing Jack smoking smugly at the bar. Ellie gets a front row seat as Sandy crumples down on her pitiful situation. Sandy attempts to run away from Jack and all the ugliness that goes on backstage. However, Jack is yelling at her that this is the reality of stardom. But stardom was far from what Jack had asked Sandy to do. Sandy becomes a plaything for random male strangers. Sandy returns home with different men for special play, as instructed by Jack. Ellie gets her first fright from the past as an apparition of the man Sandy had slept with grabs her wrist. It's a dream within a dream, Inception style. Ellie finally wakes up in a cold sweat and is left shaken for the whole day. Overwhelmed, Ellie rips off the dress in class, their instructor rushing over to calm her down. Jocasta gives a smug face. I want to slap this... Never mind. John drops by the bar to tell Ellie she can turn to him. Mid-shift, Ellie's grandmother calls, worrying over her lack of updates or stories to tell. Ellie eases her way to end the call when the same old man from before approaches Ellie. He returns the sketch of her design inspired by Sandy's dress. A fellow bartender walks by, asking Ellie if Hansy, the old man, had been bothering her. As the bar closes, Ellie and the rest of the crew are busy cleaning up. She wonders if any of them believe in ghosts. Ellie asks if she can sleep at the bar, but Carol, the owner, refuses. Ellie has no choice but to return to her rented room. She climbs up quietly and gingerly sits on the foot of her bed. And the vinyl player suddenly plays a record, and Ellie screams at Jack to leave her alone. In the vision, Ellie forlornly watches from the mirror as Sandy goes to do what she is told to do, dance to catch a sleazy man's attention and entertain him from the booth to her bed. Sandy seduces and sells herself to men a couple of times. She tells them her name is Alexandra, Lexi, or Alex. A decent man asks her what a bright girl like her is doing with her life. Sandy reckons the man is police out to sniff her. The man doesn't react, instead advising Sandy to look back in the mirror and see who Sandy truly is. Sandy refuses to turn to the mirror where Ellie is desperately calling for her attention. Ellie manages to break the mirror and embrace Sandy. Ellie suddenly gets transported back to her room, but things are far from normal. Reflected off the ceiling, she can see Sandy waiting on the bed for the men to have a go with her. Ellie's room soon gets swarmed by ghosts of all the men Ellie grudgingly allowed into her bed. Rushing out of the room and escaping from the ghosts, we see that it is already morning, a pretty awful way to start Ellie's day. Ellie refuses to return to her room, sitting the day out in their classroom until evening. John walks over to her, to whom she immediately says yes to without hearing the question first. John pulls Ellie into a Halloween matching skeleton face paint complementing their black outfits. Rather plain and basic, the two couldn't care. Jocasta takes notice of the two, grinning from ear to ear as she brings them drinks. Ellie and John get on the dance floor, shimmying and shaking off to the song. The two are having a blast until Ellie sees Sandy dancing at the other end. Jack watches Sandy from the side. More ghosts of the men from Sandy's time. Ellie claims she needs some air and steps out of the pub. Ellie thinks she still sees Jack and Sandy making out on the street. Not long after, John turns up to calm Ellie down. They kiss under the streetlight, and Ellie's strong desire not to fall asleep motivates her to sneak John into her room, despite Miss Collins' rule of prohibiting boys after 8 p.m. Ellie and John make out on their way to Ellie's room upstairs. As things get heated between the two, Ellie catches sight of Sandy from the ceiling. However, Sandy is being held down on the bed by a furious Jack. Sandy is strangled down and stabbed over and over by Jack. Ellie screams at Jack to get off of Sandy. John backs off confused. At the door, Miss Collins is forcing her way into the bedroom, threatening to call the police if John does not hurry out. John dresses up and in his haste trips over his own feet and breaks the vanity mirror. Miss Collins finally swings open the door, chasing John out. Ellie is still shaken from the vision of a bloodied and lifeless Sandy. Ellie spends the rest of the night in the bathtub, clutching tightly to a pair of scissors. The next morning, Ellie knocks on Miss Collins' door. She apologizes for what had happened last night before asking if a girl had died in the room she's staying in. Miss Collins only gives her a vague answer and ends the conversation. At university, Ellie busies herself with the final touches of her dress. Everything seems to be peaceful until a bloody Sandy takes over the classmate modeling for Ellie. Ellie stumbles back, and apparitions of men filter into the classroom. With no one understanding Ellie's torment, she dashes away until she is out in the streets. Everywhere she looks, apparitions of Jack and the other men show. Ellie finally decides to seek justice for Sandy. She reports her visions from the past to the police. Unfortunately, the police make light of her situation, considering she is mostly out of her mind and needs emotional support. Ellie feels enraged, but she already has a hunch of who Sandy's killer is. It's Jack. She thinks Hansy, the old man, is Jack. Ellie is on a mission to find proof about Sandy's case. She asks for all news clippings on London's murdered women and missing persons from the late to mid-1960s in the university library. Persistent as ever, John finds Ellie and hears her out about her visions of Sandy and her pimp Jack. Together, they work hard on finding information about Sandy. However, apparitions of the men slowly take over the library, intent on getting Ellie's attention. At this point, Ellie is over and done with the apparitions. She charges head-on toward a ghost and tries to stab it with her trusted pair of scissors. until the apparitions disappear and we see it's Jocasta Ellie was aiming for. John catches Ellie's hand just in time before anything worse happens. Jocasta is terrorized and yells for security while Ellie makes her escape out of the library. In her escape, Ellie spots Sandy walking down the street. She hurries to follow the blonde woman, but Sandy pushes her away, exclaiming to leave her alone. Ellie wakes up alone in the street under the rain. While Ellie shows up late for her shift, she faithfully makes the order of Hansy her main suspect. Ellie subtly interrogates him. Hansy reveals he did know Sandy, but he is far from being a murderer. Blinded by her rage, Ellie chases after him as he leaves the pub. The old man doesn't budge from Ellie's accusations. He walks into the street, not noticing the oncoming car that hits him. Amid the forming crowd, Carol immediately requests for the police to help out the old man. Only then Ellie learns that the old man is not Jack but Lindsay, an ex-cop who tried helping Sandy get out of her miserable situation. Ellie suddenly feels remorseful, thinking she brought this incident onto Lindsay. She breaks down over the telephone with her grandmother and expresses she's leaving London and going back home, with the help of John, the only other person Ellie trusts. But first they drive back to Goode's place to collect Ellie's belongings and perhaps some of her rent deposit. Ellie also apologizes to Miss Collins about her sudden leave. The landlady tells her to slow down and take a sip of her tea. She then informs Ellie that a policewoman came round to question Ellie's well-being. Ellie apologizes for bringing her landlady trouble, but Miss Collins says it's all okay because Ellie won't get to tell anyone about anything. The elder lady then proceeds to tell about the girl who had died in Ellie's room. Only then does Ellie notice from the stack of mail that Miss Collins is Alexandra, or more commonly known as Sandy. Sandy dreams May have died, but she also took men to their deaths by stabbing them countless times and hiding them in the walls. Ellie tries to escape, but the tea she drank was laced with poison, hurtling her into waves of pain and nausea. John rings the doorbell, and an angered Miss Collins lets him into the building, only to stab the boy in the stomach. Ellie unknowingly knocks off the ashtray into a box of vinyl records, starting a fire. But she couldn't get out of the house just yet. She has to call for help. Ellie crawls up the stairs with a murderous Sandy hot on her heels. The younger Sandy takes over Miss Collins' weathered figure. Finally, Ellie makes it up to her room, but the ghosts hold her down and away from reaching the landline. Ellie struggles against the ghost's hold until one breaks through the wall and reaches out for the landline, croaking out, "Help!" Miss Collins barges into the room, greeted by visages of Jack and the other men she murdered. Traumatized by her literal ghosts from the past, she confesses that she never wanted to kill anyone. Ellie understands, and she also agrees that Sandy did not deserve the treatment she received. As the fire climbs up the second floor, Ellie begs Sandy to leave with her, but Sandy refuses to go to prison, so she pushes Ellie out of the room. Sandy calmly sits at the foot of the bed as the whole building burns down with her sins. Ellie and John make it out of the building and receive immediate treatment. Exhaustion takes over Ellie, and she finally closes her eyes and gets some much-needed rest. The movie wraps up on a happy note, with Ellie finally having her designs presented on the runway. Her 60s-inspired creations gain loud applause and praise from her audience, her models, their professor, and classmates. Her greatest supporters, John and her grandmother, visit her backstage to congratulate her. Personally, I think her collection looked terrible, but then again, I know nothing about fashion. In the mirror, Ellie also sees her mother smiling proudly at her. Sandy also shows up in the mirror looking happy and blowing her a kiss. The movie ends with Ellie acknowledging Sandy, smiling back at her. Yeah, seeing dead people is not the sort of power I would want. Until next time. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.